Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
The product of parenting is the parent. But our children are going to challenge us, and we do have a responsibility to do our best to help them.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
G'day, we are Justin and Kylie Coulson. We're the parents of 6 daughters. I'm the author of a bunch of books about making families happy and the founder of happyfamilies.com.au. And this podcast is for the time-poor parent who just wants answers. Now, we have a time-poor parent who really wants an answer. This parent has sent us an email. Podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au. Every Tuesday, we do our best to answer the parenting challenges that you're faced with. And Kylie, we've got a bit of a doozy today.
Cherie sent in this question. My daughter is currently in grade 8 and is having some trouble at school. We keep getting negative feedback from her teachers, all of them, not just one, that she is disruptive in class and is disrespectful towards the teachers. She challenges them daily and won't be told what to do. And when they force her to comply, she is very disrespectful. She is a strong-willed child and definitely tends to challenge authority and doesn't conform without a reasonable explanation. When she does it at home, and boy does she do it often, we're able to explore why she is reacting that way and try to come up with solutions to the problem together. But at the school, they don't seem to be willing to do that. They just deal out punishment, which makes things worse, and she honestly doesn't care. She just keeps doing it. How do we go about getting some change in her behaviour at school without resorting to punishment at home? We have spoken to her about this so many times, but it's just not working. We're at our wits' end, and I am seriously considering grounding her against my better judgment. We desperately need change.
Wow. I'm kind of listening to that. You know, in those cartoons where you see the character go, oof.
I'm feeling a bit weighed down.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And whether you've got a child in year 8 or a child who is 8, it's really hard to hear this about your own child. It's hard to watch it when it's happening in your own home. But when it's happening outside of the home, it's happening at school, that negative feedback, it really makes you question your own parenting. Makes you wonder, am I doing this right? What should I have done differently? This is a really difficult situation to be in. I do need to emphasize that the product of parenting is the parent, not the child. So when your child's behaving in a way that's being judged by others as challenging, and you're obviously judging it yourself that way as well at this point, that doesn't mean that there's necessarily anything wrong with what you're doing, so long as you know that you're holding a good line. The product of parenting is the parent. But our children are going to challenge us, and we do have a responsibility to do our best to help them and socialise them. So what do you think, Kylie, when you hear an email like this? What's your initial response?
My initial response is that we ourselves have a number of very, very strong-willed children
who are quite happy to tell teachers how they feel about things, right?
And it's so easy to see that as such a detriment to their character. And yet what I see is these kids who know what they want and are willing to do what it takes to get it. And while as a small child that can be very challenging for the adult in the room, in time, if we can harness that, these kids are going to grow into powerful adults who can actually be instrumental in making change in the world. But we've just got to deal with today, right now, as a grade 8 girl.
Sometimes our children's greatest strengths are also our greatest frustrations.
Yes.
And they'll grow up and they'll use those strengths in magical ways. When I'm listening to what you've just said, it makes me think of just how clumsy our children can be. They know exactly how they feel and they know what they want to communicate. They just don't quite know how to communicate it in a way that's going to be received well.
Yeah.
Either in the home or at school. So what I'd like to do in this conversation is we answer Cherie's question and do our best to give her some support here, and any other parent who's got a child who's really prizing their autonomy and holding it as the most important thing in the world, is I want to talk a bit about the developmental realities of 14-year-old girls or girls in those early to mid-adolescent years. And then after the break, we'll talk about specific ideas and ways of dealing with this that might be helpful. So we've been through this now. We've got our fourth daughter who's now at this age. We've got our fourth daughter in grade 8. Only 2 to go, honey bun. We're nearly there. And what I'm hearing is a couple of things. First of all, I'm hearing that when the school teachers feel challenged, and even when mum feels challenged, there's this pushback. And we know this really clearly. When someone pushes against someone else, there's usually a whole lot of argy-bargy. There's a lot of pushing and shoving. In fact, there's that saying, when push comes to shove, and I keep on thinking to myself, why is there so much pushing and shoving going on? We've got to take the power out of the situation, take the power out of the conversation, because force, you know what I'm going to say now,
creates resistance.
Force creates resistance. And adolescents especially, they just, I said it already, but they prize their autonomy so strongly. And they get to a point at around this sort of 14, 15 years of age, some a little bit earlier, sometimes a bit later, maybe even 16 or 17, but usually somewhere around grade 8, grade 9, where they really want to
be an adult.
Well, yeah, but to be an adult, what that means is that they want to own their own mind. They want to differentiate themselves from us, especially, and any other adults in their sphere.
Well, and being considered a little kid.
Yeah, and the easiest way to do that is that when a big person says, I want you to do this, you turn around and say,
I don't have to.
Because I'm my own person now. I'm becoming a grown-up myself. And that obviously causes tremendous conflict and challenge. So I think that developmentally, what she's doing is normal. It's just that she's doing it in a kind of a clumsy way and frankly, an ineffective way. And she needs some useful and gentle guidance to help her. But there's a couple of other things that we probably should consider as well. We don't know enough to know why she's doing this, and we'll talk about that after the break as well as we try to explore how we can help her. But I just want to step into a school day for a high school student, anywhere between grade 7 and 12, and help parents to imagine what it must be like to be that kid. So imagine you wake up in the morning and your body is still flooded with melatonin, because that's what teenagers' bodies do. So you wake up groggy and you've got someone shouting at you saying, for goodness sakes, you're going to be late, get on with it. What do you mean you can't find your school bag? Hurry up, get out the door. Can't stand this. You're doing it every morning. What are you, lazy or something? And so you've already started off.
What do you mean you haven't packed lunch?
You're having a lousy morning. You skip breakfast. You don't put any food in your lunchbox, and you get to school. Now let's imagine that school isn't school, it's work, because for a teenager, it kind of is. They walk through the gates, they catch up with a couple of friends for a few minutes, then the bell rings. They go into a 1-hour meeting. They write notes nonstop and do a whole lot of work in that meeting, don't really get the time that they need to check in with the boss to get their head around everything that has to be done in relation to that meeting. And at the end of the meeting, the boss says, we haven't covered it all. You're going to have to take this bit home and do it. And by the way, you've got this big assignment that's due in about 6 weeks. Please make sure you get onto that as well. Then they go into, with no break, go into another meeting. Before they've had time to process and deal with that first meeting, they go into another 1-hour meeting. Same thing happens. As soon as that meeting's over, they've got a 15 or 20 minute quick lunch break, toilet break, catch up with a couple of friends around the water cooler, and then they're into 2 more back-to-back meetings, another lunch break, and then another meeting, and then they go home. At which point, they're trying to juggle extracurricular activities. They're trying to get all of that extra work done that wasn't finished in those meetings, that is, those classes. They've got demands on them that are significant for a child who doesn't have the prefrontal cortex development to help them to plan effectively and manage their way through the afternoon. And they go to bed kind of late, just wanting to be a kid, wanting to catch up with their friends and being told, get off the devices, you're not allowed to connect with them, stop it, hurry up, go to sleep. This is what it's like. And I think that if we as adults had to go to work and deal with that on a day-to-day basis, we'd start looking for another job.
Well, not only that, when you talk about it in those terms, each of those meetings covers a completely different topic.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's not, when you go to work, you're dealing with the same things all day, every day. You know what your role is. You know how to do your role because you've spent years and years training for that role. But these kids are going in and they're having a 1-hour meeting about geography and then a 1-hour meeting about maths. And then I've got to be a psychologist in the next meeting. Like, there's a lot to take in.
After the break, let's talk about exactly what Cherie can do as a mum of this Year 8 girl who's having such a hard time.
It's the Happy Families Podcast.
Are screens creating tension at home? Tweens, Teens and Screens is a webinar to guide families to healthy, safe super screen solutions. Buy it today at happyfamilies.com.au/shop.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time poor parent who just wants answers now. And hopefully today, Cherie, we've got some answers for you.
A year 8 girl struggling at school, getting a lot of negative feedback and being pretty oppositional to teachers and to parents. So let's talk about attitude at home. Kylie, be honest, when our 14-year-old girl gives you attitude, what's your initial natural response?
Time out.
I can't believe you even said that on our podcast.
Yep.
I can't believe you even said that.
I need time out.
Oh, you need time out. You need to be sent to your room until you can come out and behave like an adult.
Yeah, because often when that attitude comes out, I'm not at my best.
And it's a really, really challenging situation to be in. So here's what I'm actually going to recommend for a parent who's dealing with a teenager who is really pushing back and really saying, no, you can't make me. I want my autonomy. Leave me alone. It's my life. First of all, here's a script that I find useful, and I've used this with our kids.
Call
a bit.
Dr. Justin.
I don't know if you've heard me say this to our kids, but when they give us a really hard time and they give us some attitude, from time to time I'll look at our kids and I'll say, I'm going to pretend that you didn't say that. And then I just wait. Maybe I'll turn my back and walk away because I'm ready to explode myself. But I just say, I'm going to pretend that you didn't say that, or I'm going to give you a chance to rethink that tone or that statement. What you're really doing is you're stopping it right there at the start. You're calling it because you've seen it, but you're doing it in a manner that is pretty non-confrontive. It's not like you're saying, don't you dare speak to me like that. I've had enough of your attitude. I demand you show some respect. Have you noticed that we demand respect in the most disrespectful way? Whereas if we say, I'm just going to pretend that you didn't say that, that can be really, really powerful. The second thing that I'm going to suggest is emotion coaching. And we've got a couple of podcasts where we've talked about that in detail. So we won't go through it a lot right now. But the real crux of emotion coaching is that we recognize that our child's having a really big emotion. We try to see the world through their eyes and we state the emotion that we can see. So we might say, you're really upset right now, aren't you? Or being at school today's really gotten under your skin. You're really frustrated. You're really angry. You're really this, that, or the other. And so find the words that describe the emotion. If you get it wrong,
they'll tell you.
The great thing about kids, they'll say, that's not what I'm feeling at all. And you can say, oh, well, I'm here to understand. Help me to understand. I don't want to reprimand. I want to understand. I want to get curious, not furious. And that's what emotion coaching really is. We name it to tame it. And then we pretty much say, how can I help? Or what's the best way forward? And that's the second idea. So number 1, we've got those scripts. Number 2, we've got emotion coaching. And number 3, I think just seeing the world through their eyes. I'm saying to them, this is really hard right now. Being a teenager, being in grade 8, like if you can get through grade 8, you can get through anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the truth.
It's a hard time. It's just such a tough time to be a teenager.
Well, I've got a question for you though.
Yeah.
You know, as parents, we actually have a huge amount of control over what happens in our homes. But Cherie's dealing with this in the school,
right.
classroom as well. And she doesn't have any control over what the teachers do or how the teachers respond. She's not there in the moment. And so how do you tackle that? So
let's respond to that fairly briefly, and then we'll have to wrap up because this is meant to be the podcast for the time poor parent who just wants answers now, and we don't want to turn into a too long discussion. But I think it's worth highlighting this. We don't really know what's happening at school. We've got a year 8 girls storytelling about what's happening, and it may be that the teachers are responding and saying, here's what's been going on, and it may very well be that some teachers are not dealing with it in a way that is what we might consider best practice. They might be fairly punitive. They don't like being challenged by a year 8 kid when they're dealing with so many students and so much stuff. And so it's possible that the teachers could be dealing with it better. But I tell you what, it's got to be tough being a teacher as well. My sympathies really are with the teachers in many of these circumstances. It's important that we don't actually take sides and say that the teacher's a bad person or that the child's a bad person. What I think is more helpful is to have a chat with our child and go through the 3 E's of effective discipline. Explore, explain, empower. What's going on at school? How connected do you feel to your friends? How meaningful, how purposeful, how useful are you finding the classes? I mean, year 8's a tough time. Year 8, 9 and 10, it's like we're just in purgatory. We're waiting until those senior years of high school so we can finally get on with our lives. We've just got to sit here and keep on learning stuff year after year after year. It's a tough time.
Well, it's the year also, where you're trialing all the subjects. So you're not even handpicking the subjects that you want to do. You just...
Yeah, because elective subjects come in later.
That's right.
So there's not a lot of autonomy. I'd be looking to make sure relationships are good. I'd really be asking a question about whether the school's the right one based on the cultural things that have been mentioned. And I'd explore a lot, not in a 10 or 15-minute conversation, but across the next couple of weeks without any agenda. Just tell me about this, tell me about that. I'm trying to really help us to make some progress on this. It might take a few weeks. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. Are you cool with that? What else can you tell me? Then explain. Explain means no matter what the teacher says or does, it's not okay to be rude and disrespectful. And that's a value that we have in our home. Keep it short. Kids fall asleep when we give them long explanations, and then empower your child. What do you think? What's the best way forward? How can we improve things? What would you like to see happen? What can I do to support you? I hope that's helpful, Cherie.
I think the most important thing to remember out of all of this is that none of these changes will happen overnight.
No.
That the conversations that we're going to be having with our children in light of the challenges that we're experiencing at the moment, there even may be some pushback from them in the beginning because
definitely.
this is really challenging. But over time, if you're consistent, you'll start to see some really wonderful changes in even just your relationship with your child.
So the take-home message, in brief.
It's really tough being a teen, but if we can explore, explain and empower them, the world's going to be a much better place in our homes.
Yeah, and when they get it wrong, I'm going to pretend that you didn't say that.
Love it.
We hope that this has been a helpful podcast for you. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave those 5-star ratings and reviews at Apple Podcasts so that more people can find out about the podcast and make their family happier. As always, your feedback is welcome. Podcasts with an S. Podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au. And a big thank you to Justin Rulon from Bridge Media, our producer, and Craig Bruce, our executive producer. If you'd like more information about making your family happier, you can get it all at happyfamilies.com.au.